these days, many people can achieve great technicality, and that's difficult because the competition rises every day. More and more people play really well, and it's becoming harder and harder to compete.
I think you've brought up a good point there. I've in my career, in my life, I've met so many talented people in so many different disciplines, but not all of them have been able to make a success of their lives and their careers for, and I think you've probably touched upon that reason.
Quite often in the competition setting with a jury, what happens is that you go to speak to one person and he will say, this was not good, this was not good, you should improve that, and whatever. And then another person will be, you were great. I voted for you that you go to the second round. You were fantastic. I will always remember your performance. And then you sit and you think, and you don't understand what's happening. So I think we were always talking about, oh, it's so much better in sports. You have minutes. So you ran in a certain time, you swam in a certain time. And this is the cue for whether you are good or not, or and in music it's really, can we count how many notes you missed?
Mm.
Probably not. That would be a dead end to art.
Yeah.
I think there are problems. I mean, John might agree or disagree. I remember in the London Olympics listening to Ed Moses, a very famous 400-meter runner, and he was not just talking about how fast people ran, but he would also be talking about their technique and their pacing. And he mastered something that was unusual in 400 meters. He could take off on alternative feet, which very few people can master. So technique will also matter for a lot of people in a lot of disciplines.
I wonder, I had a question, Monica, about kind of culture. So I've always had this interest in, so in sport, for example, I think we in the past have definitely lost a lot of incredibly talented young people because you've had to be tough to get through. So you have a harsh environments in, when kids are 11, 12, 13, 14, and people develop at different rates. So mentally, they might develop those kind of attributes, but that situation is just too tough for where they're at in that moment. And then potentially with a more supportive environment, we could have kept that talent in the game and they could have thrived later on. Now, I don't know what music's like. I've seen the Whiplash film, which lots of people have. So that's kind of what I am, I watch a film and go, I presume that's like reality. But that's sort of, this incredibly harsh environment where there's no support or positive phrase or I suppose even interest in people's personal kind of challenges they might be overcoming at the same time. What do you perceive? I know you can't talk for all cultures within music, but what's your perception of that? Can a sensitive musician who might become tougher later in life, will they make it or will they fall through the cracks?
It's very interesting. I think I personally had quite a tough upbringing regarding music. Maybe I needed a little bit more sensitive approach. So it's what you saw in the film. Obviously, it can be exaggerated a little bit. I'm sure there are coaches and teachers like that. I'm sure there is part of truth in it. Especially, the school I'm coming from is the post-Sovietic kind of school, so it's quite tough. You have to reject everything else. You have to only practice, no hobbies, no holidays. And I think many musicians, I noticed that personally because I spend a lot of time studying in the Western part of the world, and there is clear difference between Westerners and Easterners, so to say, especially in music. You know, we are much more kind of like stressed and maybe focused, and we don't know how to relax. You know, summers were for practicing, and in a way, I totally agree, because in order to be a great musician, you have to put those hours. You know, it's you will not go anywhere. You have to practice and stuff, but I think it's about long term. So, okay, you grow up in a very tough environment, you play extremely well, you can perform all the pieces, but at the point when you are finishing the school, you don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So, is this a real way to go? I think the job of the teacher is actually to make sure that the person does it till he dies, you know, because this profession is a little bit, it's, you know, you don't retire. You don't have to retire. You can play all your life, which is, I think, very beautiful. But it's all about creating that meaning and that motivation. Why do you do this? Not for the sake of practicing and not having holidays. You know, you maybe when you are a teenager, you don't need those things. But, you know, when you
Yeah.
are in your 30s, you realize that maybe you have other interests and they can go along with your career. So I always thought about it a lot, and I think it's quite sad because in most of the art schools, especially you know where they train you up until 18, we don't have any mental coaches or sports coaches, and then only in our bachelor's or master's we start to think about it, but that's already too late, because then you need to go to psychologist because you
Yeah.
already, you know, you are already traumatized too much. And you know, I'm not saying that somebody traumatized you, but you know, your own head and your own thoughts, you know. So I think it's very interesting how the world of music would look like if we would have uh, mental coaches who would, you know, notice that, oh, maybe this child is too stressed to go on stage. You know, how can I help him? Or, you know, maybe he is too stressed that he has to learn music so quickly. How can I help him? And, you know, how the whole environment would look like. And I know that probably people are very different. And I know I have some friends who had a very tough environment and they were thriving in it. You know, they loved it. They loved it, and they thought it's great, and they wanted to push even more. And I knew others who felt horrible. So I guess in general, this just shows that our education systems are a little bit weirdly
Yeah.
made, right?
Yeah. We kind of, you know, I suppose my interest is always in sort of developing mental toughness rather than just selecting the mentally tough. And like the friends you give examples of there, yeah, you take people who are just genetically predisposed to being mentally tough and put them in a tough environment. They love it, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're the most gifted. Right? There could be some who are just naturally more sensitive, but they've been put in a tough environment. So yeah, I'm always really interested um, in that and kind of how we manage that. And I think it's really interesting when you talk there about kind of having mental skills coaches uh, in, in in young people there, because it, it's it seems the most common sense thing in the world to me. And I don't know if this is just because that's what I do. Why would everyone not want this? But like technically, you wouldn't go and perform before you've learned the technical skills how to. You wouldn't get on the stage going, well, I don't even know what that note means. Like you make sure you develop the skills first and then you perform. But for some reason, we don't do anything on the mental skills, perform, wait until things are horrible, and then develop the skills later. That would be like going and performing before you even know the notes to hit. Like it's
Exactly. So it's almost like you are trying to unlearn what you
yeah,
already learned instead of just starting from scratch when the time is right. So
Yeah,
I
you just
always
ruin
thought that,
any coping habit.
yeah, I always thought that, why is that? Is it because training mental skills and thinking about mental toughness and using all those techniques, you cannot grasp it, you know? It's not something you can touch. It's not something you can
Mm.
maybe prove in some way. I don't know why it is so difficult to actually dedicate yourself to do it.
Well, we often talk about it being invisible and the challenges to make the invisible visible. And
Mm.
yes, you're right. Things like behaviors and skills, you can see those. I'm interested in just exploring for a moment something you touched upon earlier, and that's essentially we're a mixture of mental toughness and mental sensitivity. And we know that being mentally tough can give you an advantage in some areas, but we also know that the mentally sensitive can, if they're self-aware, thrive. One of the things that you spoke about earlier was being a performance artist is a bit like other people doing presentations. Well, that's my performance. John and I do lots and lots of presentations, and it always surprises people to learn that I'm nervous before every single presentation. And what I've learned is I can't stop being nervous and anxious. I just have to manage it and I have to channel it so that I can perform. Because in my head, I can't think, well, I did the last presentation really well. This one will be automatically just as good, because there's no guarantee. We've got a completely different audience, maybe a slightly different topic. You can't guarantee it. So to what extent is that true of you and your world?
I think it really depends on circumstances where I play. So if it's a competition, for example, and I know I will be judged and I have
Mm.
to, you know, pass to a certain round, for me, it's very hard to disconnect from the environment. And I think we talked about it with our friends that it's all about, not all about, but a little bit about empathy and emotional intelligence. And I think I'm like a sponge, I think, a little bit. So, you know,
Mm.
if I go into a room, I immediately feel people's energies, you know, oh,
Yeah.
this person is a bit like that. And I notice people who are a little bit more oblivious in a good way, they can isolate themselves from, you know, these things that, oh, somebody will judge me. Oh, why that person clapped in this way? He tries to throw me, you know? And for
Mm.
me, like I think I have my attention is like very jumpy. So in such an environment, I struggle to disconnect myself from all the outside world. But if it's a less stressful performance or the stakes are lower, so to say, I can enjoy. But on the other hand, I noticed that now when you were talking about the presentation, I actually remember those performances more where I was really stressed.
Mm.
Yeah.
And in a way, now I realize that even though it was very difficult and I felt maybe more drained, almost they had more meaning, you know, because when I'm not stressful at all, it's just a random, unimportant day in my life. But when there is this charged energy, this, you know, this almost like anxiety, performance anxiety, right? It's actually, maybe it's a positive thing. Maybe this is what
Mm.
makes this profession so exciting, and we should actually cherish those moments. I'm just talking to myself, actually.
I think what you explained there, Monica, is just it. It's so consistent with saying earlier. In some ways, you're tough, in some ways, you're sensitive. So that that kind of positive relationship with stress that you have is what we see in toughness. You know, it's um, the sometimes the worst feeling can be feeling nothing. feeling something is a
Yeah, like
privilege.
the
Like
apathy, right?
yeah, just even when things don't go well and you feel frustrated and stuff, talk to sports teams after they lose. Like it's kind of a privilege though to be that invested in something that you can feel that frustration over something that really is a bit silly, kicking the ball around the pitch or whatever it is. And then when you talk about how you you're kind of affected by the external situation, you sort of see that the sensitivities coming in there. So that the kind of the more extreme ends of mental toughness be that your your internal state is pretty much internally derived and isn't really affected. You're not sensitive to the context around you. Whereas if you're the kind of person that you go into a room and there's a lot of tension and nervousness in the room, that sensitivity in you allows that external environment to change how you feel internally. Whereas the toughest kind of thing, like I said, be pretty oblivious to it because I'm just inside my own head and I don't even notice if there's tension, and which can be great sometimes for being able to perform under pressure. But there might be times as well where you want to be open to those sort of shared emotional experiences, being in the same arena as people that are sharing similar emotions is a beautiful thing. Like going to the cinema, going to a packed cinema is better than watching a film on the sofa because there's loads of people sharing an experience at the same time. It's the reason like crowds at a funeral are a good thing because it's sort of a shared emotional experience and stuff. So yeah, I thought it was fascinating the way you kind of said in some ways you're sensitive, in some ways you're tough, and then 10 minutes later you're kind of given the best possible sort of
Yeah,
living
I guess
examples of those.
exactly. And I think probably the toughness comes when you, even though you feel the whole environment so tense, you still sit at that piano and play, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I had many, many performances where, you know, the energy is so tense and the whole performance, you just can't relax and you're thinking like, oh my God, this is so difficult to be here. But you know, but I've never left the stage, never. So, and you know, you think like, oh well, I will never do this again. And then, you know, the time goes and then you do it again.
Yeah, that's the most rewarding kind, right? I'd say my yeah, certainly my the athletes I work with get sick of me telling them like I'm when they're so nervous and worrying about a big thing. So I'm so jealous of you. Like what a privilege. Like because like I don't get nervous for presentations. I don't get nervous for much. So and I always think I'd love to. I'd love to be like
Mm.
because it's kind of it's a rewarding experience. That's why roller coasters exist and bungee jumps and things like that. Like if we don't have that kind of contextual stressor, it's in us to go and find it. So if you have that built into what you do on a daily or weekly basis, it it might not always feel it. It's an absolute privilege to experience that sort of relationship with fear and stress and anxiety.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me that. I guess, you know, this performance anxiety, it is probably not a negative thing. I understand if you know, if you would constantly feel fatigue and if you experience this every day, probably this is not a good thing. But when it's from time to time, it's probably even healthy.
Mm. Yeah, when it's a discrete moment, it's coming up, and which is sort of what I suppose defines performance anxiety versus sort of general anxiety. It's anxiety about a particular thing. It's a discrete time point. It builds up to it. It peaks at the start of it, and then you kind of come down from it afterwards, which is, I suppose that's the joy in it versus, something more generalized that is just a level of anxiety that makes you feel uncomfortable in day-to-day tasks. That's not a nice kind of anxiety.
So, Monica, when we first met, you completed the mental toughness questionnaire. And do you think you have developed or changed in any way over I think it's probably 8 or 9 years since you did it?
I think so. I don't know if it's true, but I guess your mental toughness grows a little bit with age, right? Is that
Yeah.
truth? Truth or
Yes.
false?
Yeah. Yeah. Just more time to go through more stuff and learn more, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. So I think definitely I became more aware, and you learn about those tricks your mind is playing on you, and
Mm.
maybe you know how to deal with them. Also, I think for many, many musicians, life really changed after COVID. So
Yeah.
in my case, when I, this big competition I did just before COVID, I was planning to really go to many competitions and kind of, experience that athletic side of being a musician. And then COVID started, 2 years passed, and, many things changed. I started doing a lot of my own performances, and I think I started doing a lot of my own projects and building things from scratch. And here I think I'm extremely mentally tough. And that is very interesting for me because I did very, very edgy performances with contemporary circus clowns, and this was absolutely out of my comfort zone and very, very different field of art. But I think here I'm able to show this mental toughness. I'm able to fund the project myself, deal with all the adversities which are happening in the project, and really multitask. And I think that's very interesting because I haven't previously, I didn't know any field where I could feel so mentally tough. So maybe that's the interesting idea, that maybe we are able to find that one area of our lives where we can be very mentally tough, but also in another area we can be very mentally sensitive. So yeah, I guess I'm learning every day, new things, new skills. Now for me, speaking is another thing, sharing my thoughts, because I'm now producing a lot of YouTube videos where I have to talk about art. So, I think it's every day you can be mentally sensitive and mentally tough. So,
You're
you
absolutely
know,
correct. And it's about learning how to optimize that and how to use, I mean, mental sensitivity can have advantages as well as mental toughness. So, but you've got an advantage in that from the first, you are a very thoughtful person. So you've done what, I'm a big advocate, as you know, for developing self-awareness, but I think nobody had to show you how to do that. You wanted to become self-aware. So you've had a big advantage there. So I guess my last question to you is, you've enjoyed a great deal of success. You're breaking barriers. What's the next 5 years like for Monika?
oh, that's a very interesting sentence you use. You said I'm breaking barriers.
Well, you're experimenting. You're doing things out of the norm.
Yeah, that's kind of that is a very tough part being in classical music. I think when we are trained, we have very limited options. What can we do and where can we go? And I think this is why many musicians struggle, because either you perform or maybe you go teach, but there is nothing in between. And you know can you find people who will want to do either of these, it's very rare to find person, yes, I'm 100% sure I want to perform, or 100% sure I want to teach, or life changes and you have different needs. So I guess for me is still thinking every day, what's the meaning of it all. I think being an artist is one of the main thing, is to actually think, why are you doing this and what's the purpose of this? And of course, sustaining my skill. I want to practice every day. And I really care about my skill. I think I remember once I met a very big businessman, and he said to me, I know how to make 1 million, but I will never know how to play piano. And for me, it felt like such an incredible idea that, for me, making 1 million looks impossible, but for him to learn a piano is almost unachievable. And then I realized that I have probably bigger chances to make that 1 million that he spending 25 years of his life and actually learning the skill. And so I don't know how to answer what's next, because I don't know. I guess that's where my mental toughness hits the sweet spot, because I think when you are a musician, you just don't know where your life will go, and you have to juggle so many different things, and things are changing, and you have to adapt. So I don't know.
I think that's quite an interesting way to describe mental toughness. I mean, I remember John once telling me mental toughness is not about doing difficult things. It's about doing things that you might find difficult to do. So the future's uncertain for all of us. But you can either embrace it and get excited about it, or you can be frightened of it. It sounds like you're quite excited about the future.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, because I'm not frightened, but I feel that every day I have to really step out of my comfort zone. Even making these YouTube videos, talking to the camera, doing an interview, it's like I'm constantly uncomfortable. That I can tell.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose with that comes the growth, doesn't it? It's that like just the right amount of discomfort. So if you were to join an exercise class or go down to the gym and push some weights around or something, the aim is to create those little micro tears in the muscle that, yeah, they'll be a little bit sore, it's a bit uncomfortable. You're not going to be bruised and unable to walk the next day, because then you'll stop going forever. But equally, if you don't go enough where you don't have those little micro tears, you're not going to get any kind of development there. So I think what you're describing there seems to be like the mental equivalent of that. Just pushing yourself far enough so you're feeling just uncomfortable enough every day.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
living, isn't it?
I think that's the beauty of life, that you constantly are a little bit out of your comfort zone. Probably not for everyone, but I feel happy when I feel like this.
Well, that's a great way to finish. And I'll make an offer. If you would like to complete the questionnaire again, just to see where you are now, I'm more than happy to do that.
Yes, I would love to.
Brilliant.
I would love to. I really like the report, actually. Report was great.
Great. So there's been a fantastic conversation, very slightly different, but oddly enough, quite similar to a lot of other discussions we've had. So thank you for that, Monika. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks a million.